I'm going to tell you the story of the sniper course, my journey, and all the different epiphanies I had across the timeline that I've spent working with players shooting and learning from other coaches teaching shooting. I like to think about a player's shot as like your childhood home. It's comfortable, it's familiar, it may no longer fit your current needs maybe as your family's growing, but instead of demolishing it and starting from ground zero, which is likely to make you resistant to that whole idea and just stay and suffer through the same house for a longer period, why not remodel? You could shore up the foundation, add on a garage, expand the kitchen, and suddenly you have a house that fits your needs and you have that comfort and confidence that comes with the familiar. And I think about shooting in just that way. When you approach a player with everything you're doing is wrong and we gotta start over and we gotta follow my method to get your shot to look right, and kind of disregard how it feels to the player, disregard all the experience and all the success they've had in the past, really feels like a demolition to them. And so the conclusion I've come to is really summarized in the word remodeling. We're taking what they're already doing well and we are modifying it, progressively changing it, and shaping it toward the ideal, where they start to have higher success, better performance, and all of that without feeling that confrontation of we are scrapping everything that you know how to do and starting over, and really subtly changing it so that it still feels like their shot in the end. And our ideal outcome for the sniper course that we're launching this fall, Sniper 2.0, is to guarantee results for shooting. So we've set kind of a low bar from my perspective based on the experience and the results we've seen. We're going to be guaranteeing that your player will either make shots from 10 feet deeper range where they would never make a shot in a game before, or make 10% more shots from their existing range. Maybe they're already a deep range 3-point shooter, but they're shooting only 20%, and we're going to try to move that up by 10%. And commonly, we're achieving both of these. And doing that in 4 weeks' time with our hybrid educational course is really what we've dialed in with the 2.0 version to provide the educational side with some hybrid video content, and then the actual execution on the court, really changing a player's thought process, changing their habits, changing some of their physical mechanics, but taking that remodeling approach so that they feel comfortable with it and they are able to adopt it and keep it as their shot when they go forward. So what really makes the course unique is remodeling your player's shot by solving for power first. So where other programs try to demolish a shot and your player's confidence by focusing on only how the shot looks and creating resistance to having any lasting change, we remodel your player's shot by solving for power first, changing their definition and their capability for deep range shooting while allowing them to keep their shot and the comfort and the confidence that goes with that. So I'm going to go through kind of the 5 epiphanies I had across really an 8-year period where I started really diving deep into how I was teaching shooting and why I was teaching it a certain way, and that openness, that journey allowed me to capture a lot of different pieces from different people and come out with what I use now in that remodeling and shaping approach. The first one was started when I was down in the Caribbean. Some of you may know my story where I coached the national team at one point in St. Kitts and Nevis down in the Caribbean. My wife went to veterinary school down there, and I was basically stuck on a small island with nothing to do but snorkel and hike and play beach volleyball, and then a lot of coaching. And one particular player really stuck out to me, really had a great relationship with the whole time I was there. His name was Travis. He was about 12 years old at the time I arrived. Really passionate, motivated kid, working on an outdoor court, in the Caribbean sun, and he really wanted to become a shooter. A lot of the style of basketball down there was very physical, and not very skilled as far as shooting. So there was a lot of zone defense and a lot of just crashing bodies in the meat grinder in the paint and trying to score. And so anybody with a shooting ability was a really high value for any team because they could shoot over the zone and probably get a lot of points and cause that other team a lot of problems. And so he was very motivated to work. And it's really the first time I had mental space and time to really think about, if I wanted to help somebody become an elite shooter, how would I go about it? And caused me to, reconsider some of the things I'd been taught as a player and a lot of the things that I had already been using up to that point as a coach. I was about 6 years into coaching at that point. And so it really, working with Travis proved to be a really good training ground because trial and error, he already had a pretty good shot. He didn't want to demolish his shot and start over, even though he was probably somebody to be willing to kind of do whatever it took. Like, sure, I'll scrap it and start over if you tell me that this is the way to work on it. But what I really arrived at was the shaping approach, which we're going to get into next. And the big key points, kind of the contrast, what I was doing beforehand was, taking something like the beef approach, which if you're familiar with shooting camps or a lot of the terminology out there, balance, elbow, eyes, follow through, like stacking the vertical pieces of your shot. It's a good system, but it causes a lot of coaches to kind of focus on the wrong things, focus on some unnecessary pieces to try to make it look a certain way. And really the 5 realizations, the 5 epiphanies I had over time, starting with that work with Travis, formed the system that we call the sniper. And it's more effective in 4 important ways that I see. One is increasing a player's commitment to change, right? I think about like a high school sophomore, they've had enough success, like they're not willing to change their shot for the most part. And so having this remodeling approach instantly increases their willingness to make a change. 2 is changing how they think about shooting, right? So it's not enough to just work on technique and let them shoot more shots in isolation. It's thinking about the value of each shot type, the value of situational shooting, shot selection, and how to shoot on the move in a way that's actually really productive and valuable to your team. 3 would be changing the actual physical shooting technique, again, in a way that feels natural, like they're keeping their shot and we're progressing it. And then, most importantly, improving their shooting percentage in games, right? We could do fabulous things in a isolated gym with a robot passing machine and look like a great shooter with a high percentage, but all that goes out the window if it doesn't translate to running, catching, shooting with a defender in your face and figuring out, the counter moves to shooting. It's kind of the start of a lot of our skill set. Comes from being a shooter, catching like a shooter, being a threat to shoot, so the defense has to guard you. Strategy can kind of be built out of that. So the first epiphany I want to get into is one that I learned from a coach named Ron Ecker that has written several books and was a good mentor of mine for a long time. Still get in touch with him once in a while nowadays. But he tells a great story of working with a college player named Maurice Cheeks, who went on to be in the NBA. And where most coaches would tell Maurice some helpful technical tip about holding their follow through or squaring up your toes or bending your knees or keeping your elbow in, they were really not making any progress with Maurice becoming a shooter. And what Coach Ecker did was issue a challenge to Maurice to shoot on the move, running and turning in a certain drill and shooting in 15 sets of 15 shots at a time and just trying to increase his number. And he really went away from all mention of technique. He just set the objective very clearly and really let Maurice kind of take that environment of that one drill and use that to keep it very simple, very focused, and just try to do whatever his body and his mind could do in combination to bring about more makes while he was running and shooting. And so he tells the story. Initially, Maurice was able to take make about 9 out of the 15 shots. And, Coach Ecker didn't really talk about it. He let him shoot the 15. They'd shoot some free throws in between. He'd maybe talk about, how fast he was moving and how he was turning, but like nothing about the shot. Just, can we get 10 out of 15? And they would do that, 3 or 5 sets every day through the summertime at this point. This was, I think, on his either between his freshman and sophomore year of college, or maybe going into his college years. Coach Ron Ecker was a college coach at that point. And what they saw happen over time is that he went from 10 to 11 to 12 and finally 13 out of 15, shooting 87% in practice. And Maurice went on to have a career 57% field goal percentage over his whole 4 years in college, which is really fantastic. And he got lots of awards and different accolades for his performance, and went on to play in the NBA later. And really, what Coach Ecker was able to boil that down to is that he's focused on the outcome. Right? We want to make more shots. We don't really care how you get there. And if you give the player just some constraints around that, they will naturally kind of self-organize to try to reach the objective. Right? And that's kind of the same approach we use with our deep range shooting. Part of the sniper course is trying to get players comfortable shooting way behind the three-point line, so that when they're in a game, they're not looking for the line and checking their toes. They are shooting when they're open and finding space to shoot all the time. And by focusing on that outcome, I find they really do self-organize and start to make more shots. And I don't have to say a lot about technique in that context. And just as general concept, the human body is pretty good at this. You find a definite outcome you want to reach, and let your body go to work, and you'll come up with some recipe. Maybe it can be refined or changed or progressed over time, but your body's going to figure out a way to get that outcome to happen. Number 2, the epiphany number 2 is cognition. This is a great term that comes from Coach Noah LaRoche. And the example I like to think about, the one that's most memorable to me, is Georges Niang, who describes himself as an average athlete. He's 6'7", but skill, speed, leaping ability, like he doesn't look like an NBA player. And I met him in 2016 after his senior year at Iowa State during the pre-draft training with Noah LaRoche out in LA. And I was out there just helping train all the players that were incoming to the draft. And he ended up being picked 50th in the draft by the Indiana Pacers. And now he's playing with the 76ers as of 2023. And he's just a great product of training with Coach Noah LaRoche, who developed this idea, this framework he uses. Now he has a brand called Cognition Coach, and really just training the whole mental side of the game through practice that's designed to get players seeking and deciding, and then executing skills kind of out of that decision framework. So he talks about principles behind learning in general, principles of invasion sports, and principles of specific offense and defense for basketball. And the result of his training is really that players could create massive mental advantages by outthinking their opponents. Both speed and accuracy of decisions was just off the charts. They were able to seek and destroy any error that their defender made and find really easy ways to score for either themselves or their team. And that kind of culminates in the idea he talks about of group cognition, creating a hive mind with the 5 players on the floor so they can instinctively react to each other and coordinate their attack based on fundamental principles of basketball rather than a scripted play or a set offense. And so what this means for shooting, for one, it's always seeking to score, kind of having that mentality of we are seeking to create space and attack space. So when I catch a pass and I have space, shot is an automatic no-brainer. I don't have to stop and think about if I'm open or if there's somebody else more open or if I'm running the play. It's just shoot when open, drive when not, and seek and destroy errors by the defense from that. And that quick pace of mentally making decisions, creating and multiplying advantages, just has a dramatic effect. And the whole premise, the whole approach from the practice side is really pre-programming decision making based on principles, so the player can recognize a snapshot of a game situation and they instinctively know what to do without consciously having to stop and think through it. And being able to create and multiply advantages using that, even the average athlete can appear like they're scoring with ease. Like if you watch Niang even to this day in the NBA, like when he's on the floor, he's gonna take really open shots, he's gonna score really easy finishes, he's gonna create really great plays for teammates because he's such a quick mental advantage player that the defense is kind of panicking and overreacting to his attacks and opening up all kinds of other things for him. And so what I've adopted from that is really related to shooting, is just really simplifying for players that premise of principle-based decision making and trying to get really good at the simplest decisions and also the most frequent decisions that happen in games. So catch and shoot, catch and drive is one that happens multiple times every game for every player. Getting comfortable to shoot shots when they're open and be able to attack when they're not open is a huge advantage, and takes away that, deer in the headlights indecision moment where they're not sure what to do and their advantage or their opportunity is often missed. The third epiphany is what I call powerlifting technique. Really came from a couple of years of working with a friend doing, heavy resistance weightlifting, powerlifting. And, he was able to get up to about 400 pounds on his squat, which was always incredible to me. I got to like 290 and kind of capped out, but the learning process I went through that, just like I'm saying from Coach Ron Ecker's perspective, is like set that objective of like more weight progressively all the time and see what your body can do to move toward that. And actually ended up reading a book called Starting Strength by Mark Ripito. And even though I knew the theory behind the idea of neuromuscular activation and its effect on weight training, I didn't really experience it until this period of trying to do heavy weight training. And so that concept of warming up both your neurons, your nervous system, and your muscular system together in order to activate all the muscle groups and the electrical signals from the brain and the spinal cord, like getting all that warmed up before you try to do your best performance was kind of an epiphany in itself. But that concept I really took to applying to what we now call activated form shooting, where we take the player and constrain them to not being allowed to jump, but we start in a lunge position so that they're doing form shooting, unlike most people teach form shooting, which is what I call from the elbow up, right? They're close range and they're just doing the arm motion. We are activating all their leg muscles and their triple extension of ankles, knees, and hips up into their shot motion. And we do that at very close range all the way out to well behind the NBA three-point line that we have in our gym. So from about 3 feet to 30 feet, the player has the same shot. And when they're able to generate enough power by doing that from 30 feet away and making the shot, suddenly when they add a jump, everything feels easy. Like there is no range limit to their shot. Like if they're open, they could easily shoot it. Getting better at making it once we have the complications of jumping and so forth, is another layer to that. But the idea of neuromuscular activation was the third epiphany that really changed how I was teaching shooting, by getting players practice with activating all the muscle groups in sync that are going to contribute to their shot without jumping. It's kind of like the training wheels in a way, but it's like making practice harder than games, making the constraint really tough. Like athletically, to shoot without jumping is really, really tough. And as players get comfortable with that, their body is optimizing for power. And then when we add a jump, suddenly shooting feels very easy. There's no problem with power. And that allows us to kind of change to our second focus of precision. And epiphany number 4 is really where the remodel approach came in. What I was talking about earlier, and the word that comes from behavior science is shaping. And the format I found for that, the method I found for that is called Tag Teach. There's an organization called Tag Teach International that has a great methodology. I'd call it a communication shortcut. And the core of it is saying your final instructions in only 5 words or less, and then simply saying yes if that instruction is executed correctly. And I found that incredibly helpful. And similar to what we just talked about with the activated form shooting constraint of no jump, giving a coach the constraint of only 5 words creates a massive drive of focus to get better at which 5 words I'm going to say that are most effective in getting the result I want. And that just has really snowballed to be more and more applicable to more things, more players, more skills, even into the decision making we were starting to talk about with cognition. And being able to reinforce players by saying yes every time they're executing it correctly. We kind of skip half of the unnecessary communication as I see it now, where a lot of coaches spend most of their time, no, you did it wrong, do it this way and not that way, this is what I don't want you to do, this is now what I want you to do. We just skip the half of that on the negative side of what not to do and why you did it wrong, and just go to 5 words or less, right? Elbow to eyebrow is one of my favorite ones for shooting. Elbow to eyebrow, yes. No response, or try again if they don't quite get there, and yes when they get there. And suddenly it clicks. Every little piece of a skill can be assembled in a matter of a few minutes by using that approach. And just had a fantastic impact on my coaching ability. And again, kind of embracing that constraint approach, where just not allowing myself to say the final instruction in more than 5 words drove me to get better at my instructions. And so the framework they give you for the instructions are saying what you want versus what not to do. You must focus on only one thing, right? So you can't say this and that. And it must be observable, right? So I can't say they were thinking something wrong. I have to see what action came out of it. Even if there is some decision making or thinking involved, I am looking at the observable action that came out of that thought or decision. And then again, saying in 5 words or less. And all that preparation really stacks up to be able to have a binary response. It's either yes or not yes. And the player catches on to that very quickly. They're like listening every time for the yes. Like if you are distracted or forget to say yes out loud, like they'll like look at you like they know they did it right, and they're like questioning, what's going on here? Like, I did it right. Where's my yes? Like, I'm waiting for that reinforcement. And where I started with like K through 2nd grade after school program, kind of testing this out and learning the ropes, really taking it all the way up to our college and even our pro players that we work with, of giving them the simplified instructions so they can execute one small piece and perfect it and master it, and then stack those small pieces up a lot faster than if I gave them vague instructions and told them a lot of other things that they didn't really need to know. We focus on do this. Yes, you did that. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, next piece. Here's the new instruction. Yes, 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 we did that. And we're off and running very quickly. So the few subtle changes this creates, and kind of subtle for me, but they have a big impact on the player. One is that I am taking responsibility as a coach to further refine my instructions if the player's not getting it, right? Instead of blaming or punishing them, right? We're not running laps if they mess up. It's like, I'm going to change my instructions to make it easier for you to succeed, and then level up slowly to make it more and more challenging. I skip the 50% of time coaching and telling players what not to do. I'm able to accomplish more in a shorter time with less talk and more action. Players actually getting more reps because they are listening to me talk less, which is fantastic. And then because of number 3, because of that shorter time, less talk, more action, I intentionally use shorter workouts of 30 minutes to really prevent exhaustion. The intensity of the mental focus and the precision effort we're doing for really small, precise pieces and mastering those pieces, it's almost too much for a player if they go past, 45 minutes to an hour. And the last piece is this allows me to coach in the form of shaping. So going back to the remodel concept, instead of telling them what not to do, I'm taking what they are doing and giving them a 5-word instruction that slightly modifies what they're doing toward the ideal that I see as kind of the next step for them. Whether that be their footwork speed, their balance between the two sides of their body, where they're catching the pass, where they're releasing their shot. All the different pieces can be shaped toward a better shot, a better performance, which is really what we're after, by using that 5-word instruction and a simple yes response if they execute it. And the last one, epiphany number 5, is the 2-finger follow through. So as a player and as an initial coach, the first few years, I was teaching shooting as releasing it off your index finger. And the theory there was that's the most precisely coordinated hand-eye coordination, because you're looking and pointing at where you want someone to look, where you want something to go. You throw a baseball or shoot a basketball, like index finger has a big place in that. But what I learned over time, really from watching Damian Lillard and reading about his training approach and how deep of range he was able to shoot, I arrived at the 2-finger follow through. And I now think about it as railroad tracks. Coming off of 2 fingers is a lot easier to keep straight. And the best thing about those 2 fingers is the center point is right in line with your forearm. So now, even if your body's off balance, if you get that final forearm follow through on target, those 2 fingers are following that trajectory. And that is where the actual sniper term came from. If you think about a long-barreled weapon is going to have a longer period of guidance on your projectile than a short-range weapon. And if we stack up the 3 pieces we talk about of starting at our chin, finishing elbow to eyebrow, and finishing with a 2-finger follow-through, we now have a long guidance track for our projectile of the basketball, and that is where we get a lot of our precision. So kind of the two big chunks to summarize again are the power side is from that activated form shooting approach, challenging your body to optimize for power without jumping. The precision comes from stacking those 3 pieces I just mentioned: chin, start, elbow to eyebrow, fingertip, 2-finger follow through, to create that precise sniper-like approach to shooting long range. And that's how the Sniper 2.0 system was born.